So we're here with Connie Vogel, the leader of the Canadian Action Party. And we have talked before, of course, and you have seen some of the questions that we have in nowpolling.ca. But before we go into our questions, do you want to tell us one or two things that are the priorities for Canadian Action Party and why you are different than the Liberals and the Conservatives and the NDPs?
Well, of course, the first thing is that our country is being destroyed deliberately from within. And so that's a major issue. And I think what's come to the fore for my inclination is a recognition that the only way we're going to be able to save Canada is if we manage to create a restructuring of the electoral process. And I'm absolutely satisfied now. I've been going this way for a while, but I'm absolutely satisfied now that we must have some form of perpetual electoral system. And that's the priority. I think electoral reform is the only way, and it's got to be done very soon, because it won't be long, and we will not have a nation. We're already almost finished as a nation, and then the only solution is going to be what nobody wants to see.
So one of the questions in our computer and computerized perpetual democracy is says the best electoral reform to increase MPs' accountability is, and you're choosing. Can you read the one that you're choosing?
No term of office, voters' right to recall MPs with a computerized perpetual electoral system. Of all the choices here, that would be I would choose that. I'm not clear of exactly how we would do that and how it would work. I just am satisfied, absolutely, in my mind, that there has to be a mechanism of recall in the hands of the electorate. Absolutely, absolutely.
Anyway, you're willing to look into it, and you have voted for the number one here, which is the perpetual electoral system, although you would like to have some more clarification of how the mechanism and whether it's verifiable or not. Right. Sure.
Hello, this is Pedro Mora with Perpetual Direct Democracy, and today we have a special guest, candidate from Vancouver Quadra, running for the Canadian Action Party. His name is Sam Frank, and he has a very similar idea to what our perpetual polls are all about, with a little different name, and he's going to explain to us exactly what he's introducing with the Canadian Action Party. So, Sam, welcome. And
thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Tell us exactly what are you running for? What is the idea behind? Why are you running?
Well, I have been studying and developing the idea of ongoing democracy now for several years. What got me started on that was when David Emerson was elected a couple of years back, and instantly within a week's time, all the people that had voted for the Liberal David Emerson had now voted for conservative David Emerson, because he crossed the floor without any consultation from his constituents or his riding. That seemed extremely unfair to me, especially in these times when the direction the government goes is so completely dependent upon such touch-and-go things, when there's such a huge diversity with the electorate. So I started developing this concept of ongoing democracy, and my simple feeling is that voters can be relied upon to give their opinion about who they wish to support in Parliament at any time that they choose, rather than only once every 4 years. And they should be able to give that opinion at any time they wish.
And how are they going to do that?
Well, if the electoral system was designed in such a way that a voter could approach the polls or approach the office at any time that they wished, and change which vote they were registered to be supporting, which candidate they were registered to be voting for, and a constant tally or a constant record was kept of how many votes were standing for each candidate, then the candidate with the most votes would remain the candidate in power. And if that candidate were surpassed in support by another candidate, and the surpassing candidate held that lead for 2 months, then the surpassing candidate would now become the new representative for the riding.
Okay, now is this Canadian Action Party policy, or is just your idea that you're trying to incorporate into the Canadian Action Party?
Well, my idea, obviously I have been researching it myself long before I joined the Canadian Action Party, but the Canadian Action Party is very big on democratic reform, very big. It's one of the largest issues facing them today, and there are a lot of different ideas suggested about democratic reform. So, predictably, I mean, anyone that is a member of such a party would have a hard time being sure about which system that they want to present as their main main focus. Now, when I joined the party, the simplicity, number one, of how this system works, and number two, of how easily it could be implemented, the changes necessary from the current political system to actually just revise it so that it would be presented this way, were very attractive features. And this by-election is approaching us very quickly. So we had to have the discussion, and we had to decide quickly whether indeed this can be chosen as the policy that the Canadian Action Party wishes to put their words behind. The actual overall policy of the party, so that it is presented as one of the tenets of the party, it hasn't been decided that this is the definite direction of democratic reform that the party wishes to go in, but there is such overwhelming support that with so little time before the election, they are quite willing to put their support behind me to put this idea across as one of my campaign promises on this election.
Okay, so you're hoping that the party will adopt this policy?
Yes.
Of perpetual electoral ongoing democracy. What do you think about, we have a legislation here in British Columbia called Recall an Initiative. What do you think about the right and the ability of voters to recall their members of parliament?
Well, we've always been in favor of the right of recall. We think it's a basic democratic right. If you go right back to the Paris Commune, in 1870, the first real proletarian experiment, if you will, the time of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. One of the reforms that they instituted was the right of recall. Now, we also know, of course, that the right of recall has been used and manipulated in British Columbia by the right wing. They tried to do it. There's a right of recall in Venezuela. And the right wing tried to recall Hugo Chavez, but they were defeated in that. And by the way, that wasn't such a bad thing, because that defeat also strengthened the Bolivarian Revolution. We think that it's a fundamental right, the right of recall. If people elect a representative, and then that representative betrays that trust of the people, lies to them, moves in a different direction, why should people have to wait 5 years before they get them out? So
it's part of the communist platform to have the right to recall.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? All right.
Now, there is another very important topic in your party, which is the financing of capital developments in Canada, or provincially or municipally. And can you just read here the questions and tell us which one you would vote for?
This deals with the question of where governments go to finance capital development and deficit, and the question is, should we use the Bank of Canada? Should there be no borrowing allowed, period, with only balanced budgets? Should there be using the Bank of Canada and private banks, or do we just not know, or should there be only private banks? The Canadian Action Party has always taken the position that we should be using the Bank of Canada. What's interesting is that within monetary reformers, people who understand about the Bank of Canada, understand the power of money, there are some who say everything, 100% of money should all be borrowed by the Bank of Canada. And they criticize the Canadian Action Party because we have consistently said, you don't need to fund everything from the Bank of Canada, and we don't know what the percentage, but there should be some use of private banks. And Canada has never borrowed more than 25%, and when we did, from the Bank of Canada, and when we did, we had our best years. So, I mean, clearly our policy is we use the Bank of Canada. There would be some places where we would say it's important for the continuity of private banks, not for capital development and deficit, but for some other operations of the system, because a lot of people have money invested in various places, and you just can't suddenly turn that all off. People you'd be chaos for people. So I want it to be clear that your question is talking about capital development and deficit, and we would answer to that clearly 100% from the Bank of Canada.
Canadian Action Party is very strong on, and is about borrowing money, governments borrowing money to develop projects. And how would you make that money, produce that money, borrow that money to develop projects?
Unquestionably, the Bank of Canada.
The Bank of Canada. Now, there is also one that says both Bank of Canada and private banks. But do you think that the Bank of Canada should be the sole lender of money to projects?
At present, yes. At present, yes. All of the private banks that lend to the government at present have it as their main pursuit is to make themselves rich and make everybody else poor. That is why they exist, and that's what they try to do. There's no reason that such an agenda should be allowed to be supported by our government. That's not acceptable.
So your choice is only the Bank of Canada should be lending money to governments?
Yes, yes.
All right.
And military intervention in Afghanistan is another big topic that
Get out.
And some of the answers are, you want to read the answers?
Yeah, the first one says we must withdraw our terrorist troops immediately, stop using aid as a tool of war, and support peaceful negotiations. Second one says withdraw the forces, send aid and support for diplomacy, listen to the people there and develop a real understanding, bridge the divide, bring in peace. The next one is I don't know, I don't have enough information. The next is I agree with our present foreign policy of intervention. It's our responsibility to participate in the U.S. war on terrorism. And the next one is withdraw from Afghanistan and redeploy in more needed areas such as Africa. My inclination would be to go with number one, withdraw our terrorist troops immediately. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't like the use of the word terrorist to define the Canadians who are going there. You know, the people we have are our military who don't see themselves as terrorists. But I understand the thought behind this first message, and clearly our people being there are performing acts of terrorism. In my view, I agree with that, although the individuals who are Canadian military who are there, I don't define as terrorists. I mean, they're doing their job and they're doing what they're told to do.
What do you say to those critics that say if we leave, the chaos will ensue?
Chaos will ensue? Chaos where? In Afghanistan?
In Afghanistan.
Oh, there's a lot of chaos there right now, isn't there?
But they think that it would be worse
No, it
because
won't be worse.
our troops are defending some people from being killed.
No. Let them do their, get out, let them have their nation, let them have their sovereignty, let them do their what they're going to do. If you believe in sovereignty, if you know, what we have become, Canadians, in conjunction with the U.S. role now, is hypocrites. And pretending that we have a holier-than-thou kind of attitude. Let's be very clear that the reason that we're in there is because we're tied to the United States now, and the reason the United States is in there has everything to do with their intention and their necessity of being there in order for them to rule the world. And they've already destroyed in that area, in that region. I mean, it's actually the greatest of sins, if you want to use that kind of language, or of evils. Then the military actions that have taken place in that part of the world in the last 10, 15 years have destroyed nature, the depleted uranium, what's happened to the water, to the lands, to the people, the cancer rates, all that. That what has been done allegedly in the name, in the hypocritical name of justice and of humanity, has all been the beginning of the ends of probably the world, because you don't put walls up in the air or on the water or on the land to prevent the movement of the effects of the depleted uranium. And there's nothing good about what's going on in there. Nothing. Only evil.
All right.
How can we as a nation that pretends that we're humanitarian and that we want to be peacekeepers?
Would you recommend members of the Canadian Action Party and other people to go and register their opinion on this issue?
Oh yes, absolutely.
And you will do that through an email or something to
I can.
If you can.
Sure, I can and I will. Yes.
That was it. Okay.
The war in Afghanistan is, you know, if not the most important issue, certainly one of the 2 or 3 most important issues facing our country, and around which this election is likely to be fought. And I don't think the Tories really want to fight around the issue of Afghanistan. Because despite all of their efforts, and they have been many, over the past more than a year, to convince the Canadian people that this is a just war, that this is that this is a righteous effort and that we need to rally around the troops. And all of the devices that they've used, that phony, absolutely bogus poll. You remember that poll that came out in the fall from Afghanistan? From some polling company. They went to Afghanistan, they talked to the Afghan people, and 83% of the Afghan people want Canada to stay and fight. What kind of poll was that? How can you take a poll in a war zone? Imagine some Afghan peasant, who's been victimized by these bunch that constitute the Karzai government, torturing people, disappearing people and whatnot. And then a Western pollster comes into their village and says, do you support this war or don't you? What do you think they're going to say? But I don't even think they went into the villages. I think they just stayed in the little green zone. You know the green zone they have in Baghdad? Well, they got a green zone of sorts in Kabul as well. I think they just stayed inside the zone and interviewed people. That's where they got their 83%. It was absolutely bogus, and it wasn't for the benefit of the Afghan people. It was to try to manipulate people in the NATO countries, including Canada. And bringing all these heads of state to Ottawa, even Karzai himself saying, yes, Canada, we need you. The head of NATO, we need you. Keep up the good work. And then, of course, this sham of an independent panel, the Manly panel. We said back in the fall when when Harper announced this panel that it was it was a scam. I think we called it a stacked deck, right? He was stacking the deck to get exactly what the Tories want. And that's exactly what happened. If you read that report, it's exactly what the Tories wanted. But despite all of that and all of that, they haven't been able to convince the Canadian people to support this war. And in fact, more Canadians oppose the war now than opposed it before.
Well, I'm liking the first issue, withdraw our terrorist troops immediately, stop using aid as a tool of war. It's interesting that they call our troops terrorist troops.